The first thing my son ever taught his father was how shame feels. I remember the exact look on Daniel's face 19 years later when Ethan stepped out of that government sedan in his navy dress whites. My ex-husband's mouth fell open, his skin turned the color of old paper, and for one beautiful second, the whole world seemed to stop breathing. He had come to claim a son he'd never raised. He had no idea he was standing face to face with the man I had spent 19 years building from the ruins he left behind. But to understand that moment, you have to go back to the night Daniel walked out on us. It was October of 1998 in Chillicothe, Ohio, and the air had that cold edge that warns you winter is coming. I was 8 months pregnant, tired enough to cry over burned toast, and standing in the little spare bedroom we'd turned into a nursery. I'd spent all afternoon painting clouds on the pale blue walls. They weren't very good clouds, more like lumpy cotton balls, but I'd imagined our son staring at them someday from his crib. That thought had carried me through a lot back then. Daniel and I had been married almost 11 years. We weren't one of those couples people envied, but we'd been steady once. Solid. We'd met at church when I was 23 and he was 26. He had kind eyes and a laugh that made people trust him. Or maybe I was just young enough to mistake confidence for goodness. Things had changed after his promotion fell through at Whitmore Accounting. He'd been certain the regional manager position was his. He'd spent months talking about the raise the Bigger House private school someday for our baby. Then they gave it to a younger man from Columbus. Something in Daniel hardened after that. He started coming home later. Stopped touching my stomach when the baby kicked. Stopped asking how I felt. And started looking at me like I was something heavy he'd been forced to carry. That evening, I heard his car pull into the driveway just after 9. I smiled despite myself. I'd made pot roast, though by then it was cold and dry in the oven. I thought maybe tonight would be better. Maybe he'd apologize for being distant. Maybe we'd sit together and talk about names for the baby. Maybe. I heard the front door open. Then close. But there were no footsteps toward the kitchen. No "Hey Maggie." Just silence. A strange waiting silence. I walked into the living room and stopped cold. Daniel was standing by the fireplace in his gray suit, still wearing his overcoat. In one hand was his leather briefcase. In the other was a manila envelope. His face was blank. Not angry. Not sad. Blank. And somehow that was worse. "Daniel," I said. He looked at my stomach first, then at me. There wasn't an ounce of warmth in his eyes. "We need to talk." Every woman who has ever heard those words knows what comes next. Still, my heart tried to bargain. Maybe it's about work. Maybe his mother's sick. Maybe. He tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a flat, terrible sound. "Those are divorce papers." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my mind refused to process it. "What?" "I've filed already." The room tilted. "What are you talking about?" He exhaled, sharply irritated, like I was making him repeat something obvious. "I'm leaving." I stared at him. "Number?" It was all I could say. "Number." The word sounded small and stupid even to me. He looked away, jaw tightening. "There's someone else." The sentence hit harder than if he'd slapped me. I gripped the back of the couch to steady myself. "Who?" "Lydia." His secretary. 26 years old. Bright lipstick and heels too high for office carpeting. I'd met her once at the company Christmas party. She'd called me ma'am. I remember because it made me feel ancient. I swallowed hard. "Daniel, I'm 8 months pregnant." He laughed then. A cold, ugly sound. "Exactly." I blinked. "What does that mean?" His voice rose. "It means I'm done pretending this is what I wanted." I flinched. He stepped closer, years of resentment pouring out like poison finally uncorked. "You and your child are ruining my life." I felt the baby move sharply inside me as if startled. My hand flew to my stomach. Daniel's lip curled. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to spend my life trapped in this town, drowning in bills tied to diapers and feedings and PTA meetings like some pathetic cliché." Tears blurred my vision. "Daniel, please. Get out." I thought I'd misheard. "What?" "Get out of my house." "Our house?" He sneered. "My name is on the deed." I shook my head, trembling. It's 10 o'clock at night. Not my problem. I searched his face for mercy. For recognition. For the man I married. There was nothing there. Then he said the words I still hear sometimes when the house is quiet enough. Get out, you idiot. I packed one suitcase. He stood in the doorway and watched. Didn't help. Didn't apologize. Didn't even pretend this hurt him. When I waddled past him carrying that suitcase and my winter coat over one arm, he stepped aside like I was a stranger leaving a hotel room. Outside, the October wind cut through my sweater. I loaded my things into my old Chevy and drove 20 miles to my mother's farmhouse, crying so hard I had to pull over twice. Mama opened the door before I knocked. One look at my face told her everything. She wrapped her arms around me and held on. And as I sobbed into her shoulder, she whispered words that carried me through the hardest years of my life. Sometimes the people who leave make room for the ones God sends. 3 weeks later, my labor started just before dawn. And when the nurse asked what name to write under father on the birth certificate, I looked down at my perfect little boy and said quietly, "Leave it blank." People like to talk about courage as if it arrives all at once. Like there's some grand moment when fear disappears and a person suddenly becomes strong. That wasn't how it happened for me. Courage came in smaller pieces. It came the first time Ethan woke crying at 2 a.m. and I realized there was no one else coming to help. It came when I counted quarters at the grocery store while the cashier politely looked away. It came every time I smiled and said, "We're doing just fine," even when I wasn't sure we were. That's how most women survive, I think. Not through miracles. Through ordinary stubbornness. Ethan was born on a frosty November morning in Adena Regional Hospital, pink-cheeked and loud enough to wake half the county. The nurses laughed when they heard his cry. Well, one of them said that boy plans to be heard. She wasn't wrong. He had a strong little set to his jaw even then, like he'd arrived with business to attend to. Mama held him while I slept after delivery. When I woke, she was rocking him by the window with tears in her eyes. "He's got your father's hands," she whispered. That meant something to me. My father had been a quiet, honorable man who fixed tractors, kept his promises, and never once raised his voice in anger. He'd died 3 years before Ethan was born, and I'd missed him fiercely ever since. I liked believing some piece of his goodness had found its way into my son. We brought Ethan home to Mama's farmhouse because there was nowhere else to go. Daniel sold our house 6 months later and moved to Columbus with Lydia. I heard through town gossip that they married in the spring. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted him back, but because it proved how quickly a man can erase the life he once promised to cherish. The divorce settlement was thin enough to fold into a church bulletin. Daniel's lawyer had argued he was financially overextended. I couldn't afford to fight it. So I signed. And started over. Mama cleared out her sewing room so Ethan and I could stay there. I took a waitress job at Harlow's Diner in town, working breakfast and lunch shifts while Mama watched him. At night, after putting him to bed, I cleaned classrooms at Chillicothe High School. On weekends, I balanced books for Mr. Landry's hardware store. I was tired in ways I didn't know a human body could be tired. But every morning, Ethan would grin when he saw me, and somehow the world felt possible again. He was a good child. Not perfect. No child is. At 3, he colored all over Mama's wallpaper with blue crayon because he wanted to make the room happier. At 6, he punched a boy in Sunday school for calling another child stupid. At 9, he tried to build a rocket in the barn and nearly set a hay bale on fire. But he always told the truth when confronted. Always apologized when he was wrong. And always tried to do better. That mattered. When Ethan was 7, he asked about his father for the first time. We were sitting at the kitchen table doing spelling homework. He looked up and said it plainly without drama. "Why don't I have a dad?" I dreaded that question for years. I set down my coffee and chose my words carefully. "Some men help create life," I said, "but very few earn the right to be called father." He frowned in concentration. "Did mine not earn it?" "Number." He thought about that, then nodded, and went back to spelling mountain. Children can accept truths adults spend decades resisting. He never asked again. Not because he didn't care. Because he trusted me. That trust became the sacred responsibility of my life. By high school, Ethan had become the kind of young man people notice. Not flashy. Not loud. Quietly excellent. He played varsity baseball, made honor roll every semester, and volunteered every Saturday at the Ross County Veterans Center. That last part surprised me at first. Most boys his age wanted football games and girlfriends and excuses to avoid responsibility. But Ethan loved sitting with those old men. He listened to their stories about Vietnam, Korea, and in one case, even World War II. He treated them with a respect that seemed older than his years. One afternoon I picked him up after volunteering and asked what he liked so much about it. He looked out the truck window for a moment before answering. "They know what matters." I smiled. "What matters?" He glanced at me. "Keeping your word." I had to blink back tears before driving. During his junior year, he came home carrying an envelope from Annapolis. The return address read, United States Naval Academy. My heart nearly stopped. He handed it to me, hands shaking. "You open it." I did. The acceptance letter was only 1 page, but I must have read it 5 times before the words settled into meaning. Appointment offered. Full scholarship. Officer training. A future bigger than anything I'd dared imagine. I looked up at my son, and for a moment all I could see was that newborn baby in the hospital blanket. He smiled nervously. "Well," I started crying so hard I couldn't answer. He laughed and hugged me. Mama, older now and slower in her movements, stood in the doorway wiping her own eyes. "Your granddaddy would be proud," she said. And for the first time in years I thought maybe every hard mile had led exactly where it was supposed to. A month before Ethan's commissioning ceremony, I got curious and searched Daniel's name online. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me wanted proof that life had turned out better for him. It hadn't. Lydia had divorced him after 12 years. Financial records showed bankruptcy proceedings. His LinkedIn page was a graveyard of short-term accounting jobs. He looked smaller in his profile picture. Defeated. I closed the laptop and felt nothing. Or so I thought. 3 weeks later, a black sedan pulled into Mama's driveway. A man stepped out. Older, heavier, but unmistakably Daniel. And the smile on his face told me he thought he still belonged there. For a moment I honestly thought I was imagining him. 19 years is a long time to carry anger, long enough for it to fade into something flatter, quieter. Not forgiveness exactly, more like sediment settling at the bottom of deep water. You know it's there. You just stop stirring it. But the second I saw Daniel standing at the edge of Mama's gravel driveway, all of it rose at once. The hurt. The humiliation. The memory of that October wind on my face as I stood 8 months pregnant beside my car, wondering how the man I'd loved could look at me like I was garbage he'd finally taken out. Time had not been especially kind to him. His dark hair was mostly gone now, what remained gone silver around the sides. He'd put on weight around the middle and there was a softness to him. I didn't remember the kind that comes from too much disappointment and too little purpose. But his smile was the same. Polished. Practiced. The smile of a man who had spent his life assuming charm would solve what character could not. I stood on the porch and didn't move. Mama was inside napping in her recliner. Ethan was still at officer training in Virginia, due home Friday night. It was Thursday afternoon. The cicadas buzzed lazily in the maple trees. And my past had come calling. Daniel lifted one hand as though we were old friends. Maggie. No one had called me that in years. Not since him. Why are you here? He gave a small laugh, almost wounded. That's quite a greeting. I said nothing. His smile faltered. He glanced toward the house, then back at me. I'd like to come in. Number. The single word landed harder than I expected. His expression tightened. I drove 2 hours. That was your decision. For a second I thought he might turn around and leave. Instead he sighed dramatically and climbed the porch steps. Up close I could smell expensive cologne trying and failing to cover stale sweat. He folded his hands like a man preparing for prayer. I'm here to see my son. There it was. No apology. No acknowledgement of 19 years. Straight to the claim. My stomach went cold. Your son. His jaw flexed. Yes. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. You don't have a son here. His eyes sharpened. Don't do that. Do what? Punish me forever for a mistake I made when I was young. A mistake. That was what he called abandoning a pregnant wife. I crossed my arms. You were 37. He looked away, briefly irritated at being corrected. Then his face softened into what I suppose he thought was sincerity. Maggie, I was scared. I handled things badly. I know that. Handled things badly. Like forgetting to mail a bill. Not throwing your family away. He continued. I've had a lot of time to think. I've changed. I said nothing. He took my silence as invitation. I found Ethan online, Naval Academy, officer now. A strange pride slipped into his voice, as though Ethan's accomplishments reflected back on him. He looks just like me. The sentence turned my blood to ice. Number. He looked like my father. He looked like himself. But Daniel had always been the sort of man who mistook resemblance for ownership. You had no right to search for him. He's my flesh and blood. There's more to fatherhood than biology. His face hardened. There are legal rights here. The shift was immediate. Like watching a snake uncurl. I should have expected it. Men like Daniel only wear humility until it fails to produce obedience. He stepped closer. I've spoken with an attorney. That surprised me. Not because I thought he wouldn't. Because it meant this wasn't impulsive sentimentality. He'd planned this. I'm entitled to establish contact, and if Ethan ever receives inheritance benefits, anything substantial. I laughed. Actually laughed. He stopped mid-sentence. You think this is about money? The look in his eyes answered before his mouth did. This isn't about money. It was absolutely about money. He'd learned Ethan had become something important and assumed proximity might profit him. The same opportunism that had once sent him chasing Lydia and Columbus promotions was alive and well. Just older now. More desperate. I looked him straight in the eye. You abandoned him before he took his first breath. His nostrils flared. Blood is blood. The words hung there. Ugly. Ancient. As though biology were some sacred contract no behavior could break. I thought of every fever I'd sat through. Every late-night homework crisis. Every baseball uniform I'd scrubbed clean. Every overtime shift. Every sacrifice. And suddenly I felt calm. Because I knew something Daniel did not. Blood can begin a life. It cannot build one. Ethan comes home tomorrow, I said. His whole posture changed. Hope flickered across his face. He pictured what he wanted to see. A curious young man longing to know his father. A son eager to fill some imagined emptiness. He smiled. Good. I opened the screen door. Come back Saturday morning. His smile widened. For one terrible second he actually looked triumphant. As if he had already won. I knew you'd do the right thing. I almost corrected him. But I didn't. I simply watched him walk down the porch steps and back to his car. When he drove away, gravel crunching beneath his tires, my hands began to shake. Ethan arrived home Friday just after 8. Mama cried when she saw him. I did too. He'd grown leaner, stronger somehow. There was a stillness to him now, the kind men carry when responsibility has shaped them. Over dinner after Mama went to bed, I told him everything. Not the softened version I'd given him as a boy. Everything. The divorce papers. The affair. The words Daniel had said. Get out, you idiot. Ethan listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When I finished, silence filled the kitchen. Finally, he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You should have told me sooner. I wanted to protect you. His grip tightened gently. You did. Then he leaned back and looked toward the dark window. Let him come. There was no anger in his voice. No excitement. Just certainty. And somehow that certainty unsettled me more than rage ever could. Because in that moment I realized my son had become a man fully capable of facing the ghost who made him. And Daniel had no idea what was waiting for him. Saturday morning arrived clear and cool, the kind of early Ohio autumn day that makes the whole world feel freshly washed. The maple leaves along the driveway had just started turning gold. Mama was already in the kitchen baking biscuits, humming an old Patsy Cline tune under her breath like she did whenever she was nervous. She knew what was coming. None of us said much over breakfast. Ethan sat at the table in a plain gray t-shirt, drinking coffee and reading through something on his tablet. Calm as ever. No fidgeting, no pacing. No sign at all that he was about to meet the man who had abandoned him before he was born. I studied him over the rim of my mug and marveled at how self-contained he had become. At 19, Daniel had been restless and hungry for attention, always reaching for something just beyond him. At 19, Ethan already seemed anchored, steady in ways many men never become. He caught me staring and smiled. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. He set down the tablet. "Mom." There was something about the way he said it, firm, gentle, reassuring. The way I used to say his name when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. It nearly undid me. I just hate that he gets to walk in here after all this time. Ethan's expression softened. He doesn't get anything. I looked at him. He gave me the smallest smile. He gets whatever we decide to give. And just like that, the fear loosened its grip. At exactly 10:17, a dark Lincoln sedan rolled up the gravel drive. Daniel was punctual. He always had been when he wanted something. He stepped out in pressed khakis and a navy blazer, dressed like a man auditioning for respectability. He carried a bakery box from Schmidt's in Columbus, as though cinnamon rolls could make up for 19 years. Mama snorted when she saw it. Cheap man's peace offering. That made Ethan grin. Then another vehicle turned into the drive. A black government SUV. Daniel frowned. The SUV stopped near the porch. A uniformed driver stepped out briskly and opened the rear passenger door. And then Ethan emerged. He was dressed in full U.S. Navy service whites. Immaculate. Every line crisp, every button polished, every movement measured and composed. The morning sun caught the gold shoulder boards and gleamed against the bright white fabric. For one breathless second, even I forgot to move. He looked extraordinary. Not because of the uniform, because of the man inside it. Disciplined. Earned. Whole. Daniel froze halfway up the porch steps. The bakery box slipped in his fingers. His mouth opened slightly. He had expected a boy. Instead, he was looking at a naval officer. At the life he had forfeited before it began. Ethan climbed the steps and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. Then he turned to Daniel. "Mr. Reeves." Not Dad. Not Father. Mr. Reeves. The title landed like a slap. Daniel blinked, then forced a smile. "Son." Ethan lifted one hand. "Not rude. Simply final. My name is Lieutenant Ethan Reeves." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut paper. Daniel swallowed. "Yes, of course, Lieutenant." He extended his hand. Ethan looked at it for half a second before shaking it once. Firmly. Without warmth. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in the living room. Mama remained in her recliner knitting, which was her way of supervising without appearing to. I sat beside the window. Ethan took the armchair opposite Daniel. Daniel perched on the edge of the couch like a man at a job interview. He smiled too often. Talked too quickly. Tried too hard. "I've followed your achievements," he said. Ethan's face revealed nothing. "Have you?" Daniel hesitated. "Well, online, news releases, academy notices." How thoughtful. The politeness in Ethan's voice was devastating. Daniel cleared his throat. "I'm proud of what you've become." That was the first crack. Because even he heard how empty it sounded. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Why?" Daniel blinked. "What? Why are you proud?" "Well, because you're my son." Ethan held his gaze. "What's my birthday?" The question hit like a hammer. Daniel froze. His eyes flicked briefly toward me, hoping for rescue. I gave none. "April," he said uncertainly. Ethan's expression didn't change. "My birthday is November 12th. Daniel's ears reddened. Ethan continued. "What hospital was I born in?" No answer. "What was my first school?" Silence. "What position did I play in Little League?" Nothing. Ethan sat back. Calm as still water. "My mother worked 3 jobs so I could stand where I stand. She missed sleep meals and years of comfort." Daniel's breathing quickened. Ethan's voice remained even. "You gave DNA, she gave a life." The words struck harder because they were spoken without anger. Just truth. Daniel's face collapsed. For the first time since arriving, the performance dropped away. He looked old. Not merely aged. Old in spirit. His eyes filled. I was wrong. Ethan regarded him quietly, then said something I will never forget. No, wrong is forgetting an anniversary or saying something cruel in anger. He leaned forward. Absence is a choice repeated every day for 19 years. Daniel's breath caught. And then to my astonishment he began to cry. Not dramatically. Not manipulatively. The way men cry when denial finally breaks and they see the wreckage clearly. I was ashamed, he whispered. No, Ethan said. You are ashamed now. Back then you were selfish. The precision of it left the room still. Daniel lowered his head. He didn't argue. Couldn't. After a long silence, he looked up. His voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. Is there any way to fix this? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to me and waited, giving me what Daniel never had. A choice. In that moment, I understood that whatever happened next would not be revenge. It would be something far harder and far more powerful. Grace if we were strong enough to offer it. For most of my life, I believed justice would feel louder. I thought if the day ever came when Daniel Reeves finally understood what he had done, there would be thunder in it. Some great satisfaction, some sharp and glorious sense of balance restored. Instead, what I felt sitting there in Mama's living room was something quieter. Not triumph, not even relief. Just stillness. The kind that settles over a field after harvest when all the hard work is done and the land finally rests. Daniel sat on the couch with his shoulders folded inward, his hands trembling between his knees. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Across from him, Ethan waited calmly. Not cold. Not cruel. Simply steady. The same way he had faced every challenge life had ever handed him. And then my son spoke. You can't reclaim lost years. His voice was even respectful and impossible to ignore. Daniel lifted his head. Ethan continued. But you can decide what kind of man you'll be with the years you have left. Daniel stared at him, confusion and fragile hope wrestling across his face. You'd let me try. Ethan glanced toward me. There was no pressure in his eyes, only trust. The same trust he'd placed in me since he was old enough to reach for my hand crossing a parking lot. He was letting me decide what happened next. And suddenly I thought of Mama's words all those years ago. Sometimes the people who leave make room for the ones God sends. For 19 years I had thought she meant Ethan. And she had. But maybe she also meant this moment. The chance to prove that pain does not have to be inherited. That someone can break a chain simply by refusing to hand it forward. I looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. The handsome arrogance that once defined him was gone. What remained was an aging man stripped bare by consequence. He had already lost nearly everything. His marriage to Lydia had collapsed after years of bitterness and betrayal. His career had stalled. His friends had drifted. Even his younger brother I'd heard through town gossip barely spoke to him anymore. Life had disciplined him in ways comfort never could. But discipline is not transformation. That part is chosen. And I realized I no longer needed him punished. Life had already done that. What mattered now was whether anything worthwhile could still be built from what remained. So I nodded to Ethan. His face softened. Then he turned back to Daniel. There are conditions. Daniel straightened immediately. Anything. Ethan's expression sharpened just enough to remind him this was no bargain to be manipulated. You attend counseling weekly. Daniel nodded. You volunteer every Saturday at the Ross County Veterans Center for 1 full year. He blinked. The veterans' home. Yes. Doing what? Whatever needs doing. Cleaning floors, serving meals, listening. Daniel swallowed. Ethan's eyes held his. No shortcuts, no excuses, no disappearing. The room was silent except for the ticking grandfather clock in the hallway. Finally, Daniel asked almost timidly, "And if I do all that?" Ethan's answer was simple. "Then we'll have coffee and talk like men who are meeting for the first time." Something broke open in Daniel's face then. Not grief exactly. Something gentler. Humility, perhaps. He nodded once slowly. "I'll do it." And for the first time in 20 years I believed him. The year that followed surprised all of us. At first I expected excuses. Missed Saturdays. Half-hearted effort. old habits dressed in new promises. But every week Daniel showed up. At the Veterans Center, he mopped floors, wiped tables, delivered meal trays, and sat for hours listening to old men tell stories he had no choice but to hear. Stories about sacrifice, duty, regret, honor. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he changed. Not dramatically. No grand speeches. No desperate attempts to force closeness with Ethan. Just quiet consistency. The kind that cannot be faked for long. The counselors later told Ethan he never missed an appointment. Not once. Mama noticed it first. He carries himself different now, she said one afternoon after spotting him through the Veterans Center dining room window. She was right. The old hunger was gone from him. In its place was something humbler. Something steadier. It made him look more like a man and less like a performance. Exactly 1 year later, on a cool October morning, Ethan invited him for coffee. The same farmhouse. The same kitchen table where I had once told my son the truth about his father. Daniel arrived early, carrying no gifts this time. No bakery box. No props. Just himself. And somehow that was enough. The three of us sat together while sunlight spilled across the old pine table. They talked for nearly 2 hours. About Ethan's assignment in naval intelligence. About leadership. About responsibility. About the things that shape a man. Not once did Daniel call himself Dad. Not once did Ethan offer the title. Some things are not restored. And that is all right. Not every wound becomes invisible. Some simply heal strong enough to carry. When Daniel finally stood to leave, he paused at the door and looked back at me. There were tears in his eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I studied him for a long moment. Then I gave him the truest answer I had. You already have what matters more. He frowned. What's that? A chance to become worthy of it. He nodded slowly. And for the first time in all the years I had known him, he smiled without wanting anything in return. Then he left. And I watched him walk down that driveway like a man finally heading home. If this story stirred something in your heart tonight, maybe that feeling has a name. A memory. A regret. A person you've been meaning to call. Life gives us fewer tomorrows than we think. If there's someone you still need to forgive or someone you need to become worthy of, don't wait too long. And if stories like this remind you that grace can still grow in broken places, I hope you'll stay a while, share your thoughts below, and join us again. Because sometimes healing begins simply by remembering we are not alone. The boy Daniel rejected became the man who taught him how to come home.